Hi guys, Kairo Kikyoyu here at Channels Television's global headquarters in Lagos. Thank you so much for joining us on our Instagram live. It feels different. I'm not wearing my tie. This is one of very few times I'll not be wearing a tie on a weekday, and it kind of feels good. No tie, kind of free. So thank you so much for joining us once again. This is Channels Television's global headquarters in Lagos. We're trying to do things differently, basically. Try to, shift away from the traditional TV to Instagram Live. And today, we're going to be talking about something very, very important. We don't have a lot of time, so let's just get started, okay? Big questions. What does the government owe you and I? That's a big question, right? And the other one is, how does government's activities, how do they measure up against the people's expectations? That's you and I's expectations. These are two questions we'll be trying to answer today with our guests. But the good part is you can be a part of this conversation actually. So feel free to drop your questions. I can see you. Thank you so much. So feel free to drop your questions as we join our guests this afternoon. But please make your questions as clean as possible, okay? So we can take those questions, make them clean, civil, and readable. Are we good? Okay, so let's get started. Our guest today is someone who definitely has an insight into how government works, especially now that we're asking, what does the government owe us and how is government measuring up to our expectation? Well, he's one of the most influential figures in Nigeria's political space, at least why Naija says so. Some of us may know him, some of us may not, so I'm trying to bridge the gap. He's a journalist, he's a poet, he's a fiction writer, and a blogger. He has twice been a winner of the CNN Multi-Choice African Journalist Awards, and he has contributed to numerous reputable media publications in and outside Nigeria. The truth is, there is a number of them, so I'm not even going to go into that. So the question is, what makes him influential in Nigeria's political space? Well, top on that list will be the fact that he is the special assistant to President Muhammadu Buhari on digital and new media, a position he has held now for over 4 years. He also oversees the presidency's office on digital engagement. So ladies and gentlemen, let us join our guest this afternoon, Tolu Ogunlesi.
Thank you.
Hey Tolu, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
For joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you off Twitter. We're used to seeing your tweets and stuff. Why do you stay away from TV that much?
Well, the way I usually explain it. So I like to tell people I'm not a government spokesperson,
Right.
And I hope that doesn't sound controversial or anyway, but it's just, the government has, designated spokespeople. My own job is digital engagement, so there's no point in me sort of stepping out of my turf when there are people who are designated government spokespersons, and you know how it is where the more the number of people who are talking, the more the likelihood of confusion, so for me, it's just about letting each person do their job and focus on what they've been designated to do.
Right. Okay, you see, the questions are coming in already, but let's start from the basics.
Yeah.
We're talking about what the government owes the people and how the government is actually measuring up to that expectation. So let's start from the basics. I think there are some things we gloss over, and they might be vital to understanding how government works. So what is the role? What is the purpose of government? You hear that if the purpose of a thing is not known, then abuse is inevitable. So what's the purpose of government?
Well, that sounds like a PhD thesis question, and what I usually like to say is that government is a massive entity. Government is not it's not a monolith. So when we talk about government, it needs to be unpacked. There are the arms of government, legislative, executive, legislative, and judicial. There are the tiers of government, federal, state, local, and each of these in itself is a huge, massive entity with its own responsibilities, with its own expectations, even with, we have a constitution that kind of sets out what each of these arms or tiers can and should be doing. For people who are familiar with the Constitution, you would have heard of the exclusive list, the concurrent list, the things that are shared between federal and state government. So I think that this kind of question has to be approached from this point of view, that we need to, in asking about what does government do or what should government be doing, we have to be specific. But I can speak a bit generally and say that, look, government has a duty to protect the lives of people. So security is, in fact, it's probably the fundamental security of lives and property, because it's foundational. Without it, you cannot do any other thing. You cannot talk about investment, you cannot talk about the economy, you cannot talk about any other thing without that foundation of law and order. So that's super important. And then government, of course, but there are also other things, taxation, government collecting taxes, managing revenues on behalf of the people, via a budget, health, education, infrastructure, all of that stuff, but I'm hoping that over the course of this conversation, we will be able to get into more specifics. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, there's the definition of government world over. I mean, you find out in political science, in dictionaries, there's that definition, and there's the Nigerian reality.
Yeah.
And I think I've realized that the definition of government for Nigeria is quite different from what you find, in the dictionary or in political science. So is there really a thing as a definition of government in the Nigerian reality?
Well, I think that government, the definition of government is the same. And, the expectations that people tend to have of their governments are also the same all over the world. Okay. People expect governments to take care of them. Well, I mean, I don't mean that but people expect certain things. You expect to have basic infrastructure. You expect to have, as I said, law and order, security. You expect to have all those things. But within our own context here in Nigeria, there may be certain expectations that are peculiar to us. So one good example is how we expect our legislative houses or legislators to do certain things that the legislature is not expected to do. So people expect their legislators, their senators, to build boreholes and to make available, to build hospitals, to build, and that's not, the function of legislature is to make laws, is to approve a budget and make sure that the budget that's been approved is implemented in line with
Maybe you can blame that on what they call, what's that thing again? It should just skip my mind. The projects they have to do in their localities.
The constituency projects.
Constituency budget.
So it's a chicken and egg thing. Which came first, the expectations or the constituency projects? You know what I mean? Did the constituency projects come up because people were expecting them to do that? Because if you're a legislator, it's a bit difficult to convince Nigerians that it's not my duty to give you. It's not my duty to build a hospital. I can pass. I can pass bills about good governance and all that, but it's not the legislature does not build stuff. So it also means that it's skewed the way that governance works here. But that's just one example, and that's within our context. People should judge legislators by the bills that they pass and the impact of those bills on the economy, on the society, not by saying, that legislator is stingy, or how many schools has he built? How many schools has he? You know what I mean? So those are just some of the things that I think are peculiar, and I think this conversation is peculiarly within the Nigerian context. So I'm sure more examples will come up. Yeah, definitely.
So what you're trying to say basically is, there's one thing that the government does, and there's another thing that the people expect from the government.
Expectations.
Sometimes it's hard to bridge that gap. Yeah.
Expectations are a big part of the connection between the government and the governed. And so one other thing that government has to do, or the government owes the people, which I was going to touch on, is communications. And part of communications is expectations management.
Let's just go into this now, since you bring that up. I was trying to lay the foundation, so we'll build on it. But now you talk about communication. I mean, a few minutes or hours ago, a lot of people saw the report that the president will not be addressing the nation. And if there's one thing that has been quite controversial in this country, is the fact that a lot of people say they want the president to address the nation. And now that people were expecting that, turns out the president will not address the nation. Now, that talks about communication. And people have said, sometimes it's not even what you say, but how you say it. It's your style of communication. So what can you say about that when people think, we want to hear the president, and they hear that the president is not even going to address the nation? What mode of communication is that?
Well, I mean, it's absolutely valid for people to want to hear from the president, but it's up to him, to decide when he wants to speak. Nobody can exercise that right on his behalf. Not even people who do communications for him. It's absolutely his right to decide when he wants to and how he would, how he chooses to. But one thing I can say also about, his own style, and you can see how it's played out in this pandemic, is that, and he said, it's about letting the experts also take charge. We have seen places in the world where people would like to hear from the experts, but they cannot because the politicians are the ones hogging the limelight. We've seen that in other parts of the world. So I can say that specifically with this pandemic, that just as he told the president of Guinea-Bissau over the weekend that we will let science lead. Science must lead our response to the pandemic. So that I can say as a sort of aside to his style. But on the whole, I will still go back to the fact that, look, he is the one on whose table the buck stops, who decides when and how often he wants to address Nigerians.
So government owes the people communication, but not the mode of that communication.
Well, so the communication, look, that this, with social media now, for example, social media using an example, just tells you how much the modes of communication have expanded in the last 20 years. If we were going to have this conversation we're having now would be impossible 25 years ago or 20 years ago. I would have to come live to your studio or something to have this conversation, but so communication channels have also expanded. The ways in which people consume information has changed. Most people get their information about government from WhatsApp, so it's not,
which is always tricky, by the way.
Which is extremely difficult, So there's actually a limit to the modes of communication that we once depended on, which was television, which was one person speaking to many, are not. They have the world has moved to a large extent beyond that. So government has to adapt. Government has to ask itself, how do we get on WhatsApp? How do we get on Twitter? How do we get on Facebook? And how do we make sure that our messaging is being heard on all of these platforms?
Right.
Yeah.
So let's move on to some other things now. COVID-19 is a big issue, so it will be difficult to not talk about it during this conversation.
Absolutely.
Now, when you ask people what happened to our healthcare sector, they will say it's the government. What happened to the roads? It's the government. What happened to this? It's usually the government, and a lot of people will tell you why. Most times they are right, and it begs the question: really, is government really aware of the social contracts they have with people? Because it looks like that's not the case sometimes.
So this is where I go back to that point about being able to delineate between governments. So that, because usually you find that Nigeria, we will speak about, the government is failing, the government is messing up, which is a somewhat vague thing to say without coming down to the basics, and knowing what is responsible for what. So, for example, you will see a photo of a public primary school in some state, that goes viral. And people then say, the government. But then, you need the understanding that education at that level, primary education, is a local government affair. Now, when you understand that, then you can start to ask the question, what is my local government doing? Now, I've seen a lot of comments on this, on this chat about power, about electricity. Now, that is not something you can put as a burden on local governments. That comes all the way to the federal government, and but that is why we need to understand who does what, because it's only on that basis that we can then have an informed conversation about where to place the burden, where to place the responsibility, and how can we make sure that this person that is not doing what they're supposed to be doing is doing it. What does this person have to say? Yeah.
But can you really blame the people for not knowing who to direct those issues to and say, this one should go to my local government chairman, okay, this is for state government, or this is for the federal government, or the legislature? Now, the reason I say this is, I was looking at some of the campaign promises, for example, because that's a major issue. Before governments come in, they will promise, as people will say, heaven and earth. We'll do this. And I looked at some of the campaign promises for this administration before 2015, employment, saying that there's a target of 3 million jobs a year. Says, electricity, the APC government will vigorously ensure that we have about 40,000 megawatts in 4 to 8 years. I'm sure you know some of these things. Talk about healthcare, saying that they will ensure that no Nigerian will have a reason to go outside of the country for medical treatment. Talk about national security. And this is a quote I'm actually taking, that will ensure that under the government's watch, no force, external or internal, will occupy even an inch of Nigerian soil. So these are promises that were made. And people look around and they say, well, they don't really measure up. So is it the fault of the people then?
This is where I think the expectations management comes in. Where, look, we all know that, look, the things that are ailing Nigeria, whatever level, are not problems we are going to solve in 4 or 8 years. We have to be honest with ourselves. I don't think that there's anybody who will tell you that, we can solve these things in 4 or 8 years. So I think that sometimes where government fails is in saying we will do something, but not explaining, not managing the expectation around it. So you can say that we will do this, but you've got to be a bit more specific. You've got to say, look, and I think those are lessons that we are all learning. And as they say, people, you campaign, when you're campaigning, it's a whole ball game entirely different from when you are in power, where you then have to modulate expectations of people. But the big part of government communications, I think, is showing people the journey to the destination. We said we will do so. For me, okay, so let me use my example on Twitter. Just today, I tweeted something about modular refineries, and that a bunch of them have been completed. Anybody who has followed me on Twitter will notice that over the last about 2 years, I have consistently tweeted about this. From the time when none of these refineries had even started, I started tweeting about, look, this is a vision, part of the new vision for the Niger Delta. Every few weeks or months, I will come back and say, oh, this one has started. This one has gone this far. This is a picture. This is a video. Today, I can come back and say that, look, the one in Kwale in Delta State, the one in Rivers State, and the one in, I believe, Imo State, those are done. Here are the pictures. Here are the videos. These are the ones that are not done. So the communications thing is an ongoing journey, showing people, you have to show the workings. We're not going to change everything overnight, but if we have made certain progress in certain places, then we must show that and convince people that, look, there's a journey. We are not where we used to be. We're not where we want to be, but we're also not where we used to be. For me, that is the whole essence of government communications.
But you talked about showing them the process. So sometimes people say, well, we waited 4 years.
Yeah.
But at this point, we're not even. They look around and they say, yes, we've heard about the process. And they try to look around and say, well, I can't see anything. And people will say the best form of communication is show them evidence. Yes. Evidence trumps all forms of argument. So, I mean, how long really do you think you can hold on to keep showing in the process?
Well, no. But that process I'm talking about also involves, it's not just talk. It also involves, as I said, like with this case of the modular refineries I'm talking about, it's also about, look, a year ago, the ones that have been completed now, a year ago, they were in various stages of completion. There was evidence. You know what I mean? There was evidence of work going on. The second Niger bridge is another excellent example. It has been, 1965 was when the first bridge was completed. So it's 55 years this year. Long overdue. Now, is it finished? No, not yet. The NSIA, which is overseeing the construction, says 2022. But is there something to show that work is going on, obviously, I've been there. I had to go there because I didn't want to depend on what I was being told. So it's important. So there are pictures, there are videos of actual work going on. And so for me, the job of government is to say, look, we said we were going to do this. This has started. This is how far it has gone. These are the pictures. This is how much longer we need to go. Not just that, it's important to tell people, like I learned when I visited about, I think last year, about a year and a half ago, that look, half of the year, there's a limit to what you can do because it's rainy season. The wet season, water levels go up as much as 5 to 10 meters. It limits the amount of work that can be done. So essentially, each year you have a window of 6 months. These are all the things that I think government owes the people. It's not just about, and I don't think we're doing a good enough job of actually boiling these things down to the basics. That look, there's a window of 6 months in a year to work. So it means that you can't work the whole year. You can't, those simple things, I think will go a long way to convince people that, okay, look, government is concerned about keeping us up to date.
But so whatever happened to NOA? I'm sure you've heard that question a lot of times.
I see that question quite a lot. But the NOA is they're doing quite a lot of work, even with the pandemic, with COVID. There's a lot of people forget that. I think one mistake people also make is they judge government agencies simply by social media. You know what I mean? But they forget that.
But the NOA, pardon me, the NOA is beyond social media. I mean,
Absolutely.
you do the work on social media. But the NOA ensures that these messages percolate to the people at the newspaper stands, for example, people that listen to radio, people at the rural areas, people that don't have access to Twitter, they don't have internet. So that's their job. This is beyond social media. It seems social media has got, some angle covered, but ensuring these things percolate to the rural areas, for example.
So the NOA has nationwide coverage or circulation. They've got offices and personnel in all the local governments, who do a lot of enlightenment work, and they're doing it with the pandemic, a lot of enlightenment work at the very bottom of the pyramid, making sure that, and this is about multiple languages. We often forget that, we speak English. All the Instagram lives we have seen, all the government communication that we see and engage with are mostly in English. But there are people, Nigeria has hundreds of languages. So NOA does quite a bit of work. But, you also have to understand something, that the nature of the internet and social media has completely changed government communication. 20 years ago, all of us listened to NTA. 25 years ago, all of us listened to NTA. Channels, I think, is, how old is Channels now? Early 20s, maybe. Yeah. So once upon a time, NTA was the only platform. 9 o'clock, we all listened to NTA. We got the same news. We listened to the same thing. Government had almost a monopoly of information. It was easy. If government said something, everybody paid attention. Today, how do things work? All of us are on social media. People are on Facebook, on Twitter, on TikTok, on Snapchat. The fragmentation of communication channels. Government is competing with a million other sources of information. Anybody now can come on social media and say something that, and people will believe. And government is always having to play catch up. So the nature of communications has changed, which means that, and government is not always the quickest to adapt. I think we have to be honest with that. Because government is not always the quickest to adapt to changes in anything. So I think that's one of the challenges.
Bureaucracy and stuff, yeah?
Yes. So I think that's one of the challenges with. So when people sometimes say, "Oh, nothing is happening," well, stuff is happening, but it's a lot more challenging communicating what is happening because you are competing with multiple other sources, competing with multiple other sources of information, for the same attention span that people have.
Okay, so we've talked about communication, and we could talk on and on about that, but I'd like to bring in scenarios, because Nigerians always, if there's anything about Nigeria, is the fact that we don't seem to lack solutions. We don't seem to lack ideas. If you go on social media, you will see solutions, ideas. Even to COVID-19, people have taken it upon themselves to suggest to the government. So I'll take some of the scenarios and we'll try to discuss how feasible they are and maybe not. So for example, there are those who suggest that government should just focus on one thing for like an administration. So, for example, focus on power and ensure that at the end of your tenure, we have 24-hour power supply. I mean, is that feasible?
Well, it's absolutely it's not feasible. You can't focus. The same people who are telling you to focus on one thing are the people who are going to tell you, is that what we elected you to do? Governments must by nature multitask. You also have to keep in mind that because different things have different timelines, you want to kind of be doing multiple things with multiple timelines so that you can build a journey, to the end. So, Second Niger Bridge, for example, will not be done until 2022. Power, I guess the kind of impact that people want to see in power will not show until about, for another couple of years, because things take time, investments take time and all that. But so what you want to do is you want to do a mix of quick wins and long-term stuff. And I think that's what any government anywhere in the world should be doing. So, Luth in Lagos University Teaching Hospital has a state-of-the-art, brand new cancer center, world class, commissioned more than a year ago. Yeah. So building a world-class cancer center, takes a lot less time than fixing power to the levels where people want to see, or building Second Niger Bridge. So you want to mix all these things. Yeah.
Sorry, how does government then choose which to prioritize? What do they depend on? Do they try to, ask the people and say, what do you want us to do? Or they just say, well, we think that this is what the people want?
Well, so that's a good question, because if you look at Nigeria, there are 1,000,001 things you could possibly be doing. No government can do all of the things that people expect it to do. So every government sets its own list of sorts. And you know that, well, this government came in saying security, economy, and the fight against corruption are our major, that's our mandate, So, but then even those are sort of broad topics. You have to still boil them down. So with the economy, you are thinking about things like ease of doing business, And when you talk about ease of doing business, power, transport infrastructure, that kind of stuff is all. So governments decide on what to focus on. But you also want to think of what's going to have the biggest impact on the biggest number of people. So if you do infrastructure, that's going to have a big impact on people. If you do power, that's going to have a big impact on people. But the full impact that people want will not happen overnight. So you can fix power for a certain number of people, but look, so there will be people, if you ask Nigerians, there are people who have seen a marked improvement in their power since 2015. There's something called willing buyer, willing seller, a new scheme that allows people to negotiate for power with their discos or their gencos. So if you go to a place like Magodo or Ogudu, they've jumped on that scheme, and in places like Magodo, in certain parts of Magodo, they're telling you about how they have 20 hours of power. I'm not saying you can go and ask, so they are happy. But look, for anybody who has not yet enjoyed that person is going to naturally come out and tell you nothing is happening. I don't have light. So it's about being able to tell the stories in the places where those stories are happening, and then using that as to tell people that, look, more is coming.
It's interesting. We're going to be taking questions now in about 2 minutes. Apparently, Tolu, you have so much questions we'll be answering today from the viewers. A lot of questions. I mean, someone just talked about the power issue, saying that why can't the government engage on the main things for every Nigerian rather than multiple projects? I believe you talked about that. That's from 247. Let me see. But just before I take the questions, in about 2 minutes, let me just put this other scenario to you, which a lot of people have put forward. The fact that they expect that the government should pay those who have been, affected business-wise, in terms of employment. I see you smiling already. You know the question, but let me land. Pay them some form of stipend, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, depending on how much the government can afford. Because they see other countries how it works, and they say, why can't the government just simply pay using our BVN? I mean, the ways they reach us. Why can't the government do that? That's a scenario. I'd like you to respond to that quickly.
Well, so there's many. It's a good question, but there are many things to consider. Nigerians pay in terms of what they call tax to GDP ratios, like how much tax we pay. Compared to other parts of the world, we pay one of the lowest taxes in the world. Even when there was the whole noise about VAT going from 5% to 7.5, even at the 7.5, I don't think there's any country on the continent in Africa that pays less than 10% for VAT. You know what I mean? So so there's two sides to this thing. You can't have the lowest tax to GDP ratio or one of the lowest in the world, even compared to Ghana and South Africa, and then expect, the same kind of government interventions that you see in other places. That's number one. Now, number two, we know what the pandemic has done to oil prices, which account for the bulk of government revenues. Many states are going to be struggling to pay, to meet their obligations. So obviously there's been an impact on government revenues.
Right.
But then the most important question is that, when people say this, they assume that nothing is being done, which is false. So, for example,
they're not getting the money, for example. So for them, nothing is actually being done.
Not everybody is going to get money. There's no point attempting to, which again is what I say about expectation management. Now,
maybe not everybody.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay,
maybe not everybody, but the people that need it. Imagine teachers that are out of job, people that can't open their businesses, people that actually live from hand to mouth, as they say, they can't open their. So people that need it.
So CBN through National Microfinance Bank set aside a 50 billion fund, and as far as I know, they have probably, if they've not started the disbursements, they are close to the first set of disbursements and this money is supposed to be for households and small businesses. People applied, But one thing about government, when government gives this kind of money, nobody comes out to say they've collected money. That's one thing you have to keep in mind. You know why people don't say that? Because if I came out and said, I collected 2.5 million from this COVID intervention fund, you know what's going to happen to me? People are going to bombard me with requests for money. You know how these things work here. So a lot of people who also benefit from government policies will also usually not come out to tell you that they did.
But at least some people know them. So I think I've seen some people actually go out to say, well, I tried to access this. I've had people who have said that. But the truth is, the people that said they have gotten it are way, way lesser than the people that haven't gotten it. So
take the example of the conditional cash transfers, which are ongoing at the moment. Now, as at the time the pandemic started, there were about 1 million households collecting the 5,000 per month. And look, civil society and co, they've audited this stuff. They have confirmed. So don't even take my word. But civil society organizations have with the support of DFID and other organizations have audited and all that, So 1 million households were collecting this thing. And, I tweeted once a few weeks ago that if 1 million households in a place like Ghana were collecting something, it's a big deal. Right. You would know. If 1 million households in Guinea or Gambia were collecting, you would know. But in Nigeria, if 1 million households are collecting a conditional cash transfer, it's nowhere near the number of people who should be collecting. So one of the challenges, as I said, is that we are never we're usually not where we're supposed to be, but we're also not where we used to be. So 1 million people collecting, that's a lot. That's a big deal. But 1 million is small compared to the number of people who should be collecting. So how do it's a challenge to communicate that, to people who, and so the number of people who expect to collect and are not collecting is more than 1 million. Those voices are much more likely to overwhelm the voices of those who are actually collecting.
Right. So at the end of the day, when you look at the figures at the end of the day, you still see that there's a lot of ground that needs to be covered.
That needs to be covered a lot.
Okay, you know what? Yeah. So I'm looking through the questions and I see a major theme or something that has been consistent, and it has to do with power. I know we talked about power earlier on, but it appears people still want us to at least touch on power. I think I understand what a lot of people go through because I go through it as well. I mean, it's a challenge. I was born into this challenge. Here I am now in that same challenge. And it's the fact that we seem not to have figured out a way out of this power challenge. I mean, this is decades and we're still having the same issues. I mean, the power sector was privatized. We had discos coming and the talk then was it would be like the telecoms industry. Everything will work smoothly, and little did we know that not much will change. So what is the biggest challenge to Nigeria's power sector, really?
Well, that's a difficult question. You know, people smarter and more powerful than me have struggled with that question. You know, but you know, let's look at. So one of the big things that's changed in terms of power is the fact that we've moved from a government sort of led or government dominated sector to a private sector dominated, and this was even before this government in 2013 when the power companies were sold, when the privatization happened. So it means that now, you know, we have to keep that at the back of our minds, which is why a month ago, when there was a whole buzz about getting free electricity for 2 months, I had to explain to people that it's not going to happen because it's not government. You know what I mean? You can't expect private companies to. So we have to keep that in mind. Now,
but it was a government. It was an arm of government that came up with that proposal.
So it goes back to what I said about knowing what government is what. So it was the legislative arm of government that put that up as a proposal. Yeah. But you know, the executive quickly made it clear that look, it's not. This is how much it will cost. Each month, it costs as much as between 150 and 200 billion to keep the power sector going, even as sort of as dysfunctional as you would say it is. So for you to talk about free electricity, somebody has to foot that bill. Governments, you know, cannot foot that bill, and you cannot expect the owners of these discos and gencos, you know, which are 60% owned by the private sector, to foot the bill. Yeah. So, but when people understand this, then it helps you with managing expectations. But
you know, you say it as though people, it's hard to understand.
No, it is. Because yeah,
go on, please.
No. So, you know, I spoke earlier about the example of the guys in Magodo, for example. You know, so I'm not saying the whole of Magodo, but the you know, the residential.
Those are people who can afford it, people that have the cash, you know.
Now, but you know what that means. You know what that means is that what led to that, actually, a bit of explanation is that we are generating more power than is getting to the people at the moment. So there's actually more power available than is getting to the people. But, you know, in between the generation and the households, there's a whole lot of stuff at play. There's transmission, there's distribution. Now, there are issues at that level, especially at distribution. That's why people keep complaining about, oh, our transformer, we need to get a new transformer, we need to do this. So there's a lot of power that needs to there's a lot of excess power in the system. Now, and there are people who are willing to pay for that power. So one of the things you want to do is you want to connect the power that is available with the people who want to pay for it. Because by that, you know, because you have to do this thing in stages, you want to take, you know, you can't take everybody off. You can't connect everybody to power at once. So you have to do it like in phases. You have to do it bit by bit. So if you if you're able to take out the people who are who can afford to pay for it, then the discos and the gencos get more money and they can actually invest, you know, in more power for the people who are further down at the bottom of the pyramid. Also, don't forget that this conversation we have about power, do you know that probably there's only about, I think, half of the population of Nigeria is even connected in the first place. So there are people who are not, if we had 50,000 megawatts today, half of the population doesn't even have access to that because they're not even connected to the grid in the first place.
So you wonder whose fault is that?
Which is why there's been a lot of focus on sort of solar power. Solar, you know, there's a lot of there's a lot of investment actually in solar power. There's a lot of, you know, so which is mostly on like non-urban areas, you know, villages. So you are talking about multiple levels of consumers with multiple levels of needs. So you have solar power things going on in universities, for example, because universities are access points. If you take universities off the power needs, you've taken care of 20,000 people at a point in time. So you have all of these things going on in multiple places, at multiple times, targeting multiple consumers. But the point, so the bigger conversation is, how do we then tell the stories of what is going on to inspire people to have hope that if I'm not touched today, I'm going to be touched tomorrow?
Okay. So many questions. So let me see if we can rush through them. Now, this one talks about, okay, we'll probably get to that. This is more of politics, but we're trying to stay with governance here. But we'll see if we can touch on that. That's from Adewumi Adeyinka 50. But I saw this question. Someone asked it earlier on. I think I lost the question, but I think I can remember. He was saying that, well, how can people hold government accountable? Because I think I've seen a trend also. There's a thin line between trying to hold government accountable and being an opposition. And I think a lot of times, once some people try to do that, they are painted with that garb of, opposition. So how do people hold government accountable? And I mean, without government thinking it's opposition?
Well, accountability is built on knowledge, on facts. You want to be, and I think, unfortunately, too many people sort of just talk without any understanding of issues. So, for example, it's like trying to hold the federal government accountable for the state of a primary school in your neighborhood. That's not accountability, because it's, you don't, because, your local government and your state government, because they often hold monies on behalf of the local government. That's where the accountability should. So accountability
that we
builds
don't
on
practice. Pardon me. We don't practice that perfect system where they are all independent, in quote. The local and the state still have to depend definitely on the federal government. So it's not like you can completely say it's not the federal government's fault.
But no, I want you to explain to me how, with basic education, for example, how the federal government is holding the local governments and states back. I don't think that's the truth. Yeah, I don't think that
the federal government, the way we see federal government and the way it operates, because I mean, time and again, I remember you were saying that it's time to actually ensure that we have accountability. I think it was in that interview. I think you referred to the president and the Orosai report, ensuring that, well, no, not the Orosai report, that's for the civil service and governance. But the point here is, we know that the federal government wields a lot of influence. Take a look at the loot, the Abacha loot that was repatriated, for example. The federal government has said, well, they are tied to projects. But state governments are saying, we need those monies also. It's not just for the federal government. It is also for the whole country. So that is an example of how the federal government wields so much influence. And if they want to say, well, you, this local government, you need to do work, they can. So the people are not exactly wrong by saying it's the federal government's fault, are they?
But how does, the federal government doesn't have any power to force a state government to do its duties or its job. I mean, so again, I guess that's one of the things that has been inbuilt into us, that the federal government is all powerful and they can get anybody to do anything, but you can't sack state governors. You know what I mean? Like, that it happened in the past, that governors in the past that presidents in the past attempted to interfere with governance at state level, doesn't mean that it should be done. So look at the example of basic education. There's something called UBEC, the Universal Basic Education Commission. UBEC sets apart what is called counterpart funding for states to tap into. So federal government is saying basic education is not directly our responsibility, but we are going to support with UBEC. We're going to make available a certain sum annually. And what the states have to do, if we make available 10 billion for UBEC, for a state, the states will bring 10 billion. So it's 50-50, it's a matching fund. The same 10 billion, and you access 20 billion. But guess what? Most states don't do it. They complain that they don't have money. But then the same states that are complaining they don't have money to meet their counterpart funds will have money to do other things, like airports, for example. So those are the questions. So for me, that's where accountability starts. You ask yourself, you have to have the knowledge first. You have to understand how the system works. Then you can ask the questions that are most likely to get you the answers that you're looking for.
Well, I think that's well said. But another question that people will ask is also, a lot of things are left to conjectures. I mean, there's a lot of people who say they don't exactly know.
Yeah.
For example, I mean, recent cases, they talk about the Madagascar, what they call it formulation now.
The concoction, yes. Yeah.
They shouldn't hear that. But, you know, there was a talk about government ordering the Madagascar, as you put it, concoction. And the government later on came out to say, well, we didn't order for it.
Yeah.
Madagascar offered. But people cast their mind back to the, you know, the PTL briefing, you know, where the SGF was saying, well, if we could get a plane load of it, for example. And, you know, at that point, it wasn't exactly clear. It wasn't said in terms that Madagascar is offering to give us, you know, this cure to test, whatever they call it, to test. You get what I'm saying? Some of these things are not exactly said as they should be. So you can't blame people for trying to fill in the gaps and say, well, if I don't know this thing, then maybe this is how it works. Do you understand what I'm saying there?
Well, yeah, so there's that element, you know, but, you know, you also have to deal with the fact that sometimes also you are dealing with people who just will not be convinced. I mean, we saw what happened with the 5G, and I'm happy to use that example because 5G is not a government, you know what I mean? It's not, look at some of the kind of sentiments and opinions that people expressed about 5G. You know, even in the face of no evidence. Look at
people in government, by the way.
Well, even people in government, I guess. You know, look at some of those. So sometimes also you have to understand that, you know, we are dealing with certain things that are beyond us. You know, we are dealing with issues that have to sometimes do with even basic comprehension. I don't know if you saw the tweet where somebody tweeted about Dele Momodu's virtual birthday party. And there was a whole load of comments about how he should be charged to court, how he should be, you know, how big men are getting away with flouting the law, you know, and you are there thinking, but surely these people saw that this tweet made it clear that it is a virtual party. So you have to also think about the fact that we are dealing with multiple issues. We are dealing with people who just cannot comprehend or understand simple stuff. So that's a big part of the conversation as well. So, you know, but I'm not completely absolving government. I think that, you know, I'm a big believer in what I call FAQs, you know, where government comes out and says, frequently asked questions like,
FAQs,
you know, FAQs, yeah. Where, look, these are the questions that people are, you know, these are the most controversial issues of the day, and here are the answers. And if you look at my Twitter timeline, I do a lot of that work, which is basically, look, this, you know, and I'll do long threads. I've done one today, just basically explaining, you know, how to, like, the biggest issues that I think are, or the most complicated issues, you know. If you go to so NCDC, for example, with this pandemic has been doing a fantastic job with that. This morning, I was looking at the FAQs they did about testing. And they have basically assembled all of the questions you find about testing. You know, people have, and if you find out that it's the same questions people are asking. Why are we not doing Ghana's pooled system of testing? Why are we not, how does one get tested? Why are we not using the test kits, you know, the rapid test kits? So, and they've answered each of those questions one by one. But
you sound exhausted, Tolu. You sound exhausted with these facts. But the truth is, that's the role of government. You have to keep taking them as they come.
But that's what I'm telling you. That is the job. That's the job. That's why I'm telling you that NCDC has gone out, for example, to make that information available. But you know, guess what? In 2020, it's not enough to have that document as a PDF on a website. You now have to find ways. How do we get this message to people in the language they understand, in the ways they understand? So how do we get it into multiple languages? How do we get it on WhatsApp? How do we get it on Facebook? How do we get it on pigeon stations in TV, radio? Those are the questions you have to ask yourself.
You know, I'm looking at breaking news now that the Presidential Task Force extends gradual easing of lockdown by an additional 2 weeks. You probably knew about that beforehand, but apparently this is as though we are repeating that class, right?
No, but it's I'm not surprised, because if you noted when the PTF was announcing 2 weeks ago, they said it was going to be 6 weeks in phases of 2 weeks each.
Yeah.
So even as at yesterday, I did a tweet yesterday where I said that the first 2 weeks is coming to an end.
But does it mean we are being promoted to the next 2 weeks?
No. It just means, so I haven't seen this news because obviously it's just come out while we're on this on this chat. But I'm assuming what they're basically saying is that status quo is maintained for the next 2 weeks. I'm assuming. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I'm assuming it's. But the PTF had made it clear from the get-go that this is going to be 6 weeks in all. 6 weeks of easing of the lockdown in 3 phases of 2 weeks each. So for me, it's not so much breaking news as much as, okay, well, this is what government always said.
So I'm going to tell you the truth. For a lot of people, it is because they're waiting for their businesses to kickstart. A lot of people have still not opened, even with the gradual easing of the lockdown. But we expect that we'll get more details. In fact, the Presidential Task Force is briefing right now. And we'll give you the updates. But let's go back to the conversation. A lot of questions really I'm swarming in them. This one, I think I asked that. Why is the federal government not holding states or local governments responsible? I think you said that they can't force.
Why are the people who elected governors and you know, why are they not holding governors to account? You know, I find it's a lot of buck passing where you expect the FG to hold states to account. You know, when there are people, you know, citizens who should hold states to account. So for me, I just never get it. You know, hold the federal government to account, but hold states as well to account. It's not it's not rocket science. It's not. It's basic accountability as far as I see it. Accountability 101. That states and local governments must be held to account.
Right. That's from Andona 98. We'll be rounding off very soon, Tolu. And but it's been quite interesting, this conversation, but I want to quickly ask you some random questions. I know you're close to the presidency. Big one. Does the president go on Twitter?
Himself?
Yeah.
Himself, no. And, you know, many leaders all over the world don't go on Twitter by themselves either.
So he doesn't see all those basketballs that happen on Twitter?
I mean, he gets, you know, he does get feedback on, you know, a lot of the stuff that happens, but I don't think many leaders all over the world also, I don't even advise, you know, many leaders to be directly in the line of fire.
Right.
You know, governors, presidents, I don't think there's any upside. You have communications people, their job is to be able to sort of like get the pulse of the people to you. And this pulse, keep in mind, is not only on social media. You know, so let's not act like social media is where all of the pulse of the country is. Our job as comms people is to filter, you know, the pulse of Nigerians, not just on social media, but on TV, radio, everywhere else, and make sure that the people who we work for, who we serve, are, you know, get a sense of what the people are saying, you know. But I don't think anybody, you know, many leaders anywhere in the world will be on Twitter. I mean, governance is a lot of work. That's why we are there to do the work, you know. I don't think anybody elected their presidents to be on Twitter doing those bars.
You'll be shocked that some presidents are on Twitter.
Well,
what we have seen.
If you are, you know, you have to ask about the utility to, you know, and weigh just how useful, you know, this can be. Yeah.
On a final note, I know you're a young person, and this is going to take maybe 2 minutes. You're a young person, even though my dad will say he's young and he's over 80. But you know, you're the typical example of a young person, and there's always been this talk about young people in governance. You know, do young people get a chance to be in government or to at least get their voices heard? You remember that joke when some young people visited the president before the last election, and the president said, "Well, you know, well, wait for me to go my second term before you start thinking of becoming president." And it begs the question: what is the thinking really about young people in governments? Do young people really have a chance to maybe be president, for example, of a country?
Yeah, young people have a chance, but you know, young people have to pay their dues. You know, so self-entitlement or a sense of entitlement doesn't get anybody anywhere. You know what I mean? Nobody is going to give you power just because you are young. You know, young people have got to prove themselves, pay their dues, and work hard. You know, young people have got to show that it can be done. Nobody's going to give anybody power anywhere in the world just because you're young, and sometimes we should be careful also not to overemphasize youth or young age as though in itself it's the virtue. Everybody who is old now was young once. All of us who are young now are going to be old someday. I'm not even I'm not even sure I can call myself a youth anymore. So the virtue is not in the young age. The virtue is in the value of that young age. So we shouldn't act like, oh, we are young, so we should. No, young people can be as useless as anybody else. So it's not, the virtue is not in the age. It's in the value that you bring to the table. It's in how much you understand the system that you want to take over. It's in how much you understand how politics works, how much you understand how governance works, how much you're able to add value, how much you're able to show that, look, I deserve a seat at this table and I will get a seat at this table. So for me, that's how it's that simple.
Whew. Oh, goodness. We didn't even touch half of the issues, but maybe we'll do this some other time, honestly, but it's been quite enlightening.
An hour has just flown by.
I wasn't looking at the time. I would like to thank everybody that has joined us. Interestingly, Tolu actually studied pharmacy.
Yeah.
Right. So you should have been working on the cure for COVID-19 now.
I guess I would have in an alternative world.
I know. But I would like to thank you so much, Tolu Ogunlesi.
Thank you for having me. Well, I thanks to all the people as well who tuned in. My pleasure.
Right. So we wish you the very best. I know you have to go back to Twitter. So say hello to the Twitter people for us, okay?
Thank you.
All right, have a great time.
Take care, yeah. You too. Bye.
Okay, so this is it for today's session, but don't worry, we'll do this very often. We'll bring in someone, a politician, someone who has influence